Some of the most terrifying Native American lore are Skinwalkers and Wendigos. You guys have requested and sent in tons of your own stories. So, I decided it's about time to share some more of those. If you have a story you'd like to share, be sure to send it to the email that you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story in a future video. Let's get into these terrifying tales that are allegedly true experiences with Skinwalkers and Wendigos. My mom grew up near northern Wisconsin, and she told me some of her old stories a while back, which happened to her brothers, and their area. And some of them I feel are worth mentioning. I've had my own paranormal experiences, which I feel are quite difficult to talk about. And I've talked about a few of them in the past. Maybe I'll share some more. For some backstory on my family, my mom grew up rather poor on a junkyard in the country in northern Wisconsin. For anyone who isn't familiar with Wisconsin, this is the part of Wisconsin that tends to have long stretches of forest and a lot of beautiful nature and scenic views. One of the stories my mom told me was something that happened to a family that apparently lived nearby. There was a family driving through the forest, and eventually their car broke down. This would have been in the 70s or 80s, before cell phones were widespread, so they ended up going out of their vehicle and making the journey home on foot. Eventually, however, they started to notice sounds from behind them, as if something was following them through the woods, or perhaps more aptly put, stalking them through the woods. When they ran, it ran. When they stopped, it stopped. Eventually, they were able to get to their house. However, when they quickly entered, slammed the door and locked it, whatever was following them gave them a bellowing scream. Apparently the family had alerted my grandfather as to what happened, and he told them to look in his fields. According to my mom, he had apparently came back into the house wide-eyed and alarmed, but he didn't elaborate on what he saw. I vaguely recall my mom talking about seeing some sort of glow in the field though. I'm unsure if it's related, but my oldest uncle went horseback riding with a friend, and they apparently came across a thing. Apparently it was white, and when they saw it, it ran off. It stood up on its hind legs, bounced on a fence, and was gone. Apparently, it left behind some fur, which my uncle apparently collected. But this would have been many, many years ago, and my uncle died when I was about 4 years old in a bad accident, so I'm unable to ask him about the story. I'm unsure if both of these stories are related or not, and there could be some natural causes to this. Black bears, wolves, dogs, etc. all could be and would be living in the area. However, judging by the tone of the story, and the fact that such animals are rather commonplace and it was apparently during the day, I'm not sure if it would be mistaken identity or not. What does interest me though, is the stories of the Wendigo, which I have heard some depictions being somewhat furry from Canada. Skinwalkers and the Wisconsin's Michigan Dogman, could it maybe be related? I don't know. If it was not a case of mistaken identity, I don't really care to find out either. Just be careful in the woods. Mother Nature can be a cruel mistress, and there is darkness in this world, be it supernatural or the very, very real depths of human depravity and cruelty. Protect yourself and your loved ones.
I work as a paramedic in Louisiana. Needless to say, after being in this profession for a while, you'll see your fair share of creepy things. However, nothing I've experienced could top this. The unit that I work on is quite rural compared to most others in our fleet. It was a busy night, so we were posted at a halfway point between our station and another in town to cover both parts of the area. We liked to post off the road about a quarter of a mile into the woods so we would not be bothered while we were there. It was late, so my partner and I got to the back of our unit because there is much more room to stretch out and relax in the back. My partner was asleep, and I was messing around on my phone. I felt something bump into the side of our unit, shaking the whole truck. Now, our trucks are heavy, and it would take a substantial amount of force to shake it like I had felt. I woke my partner and told him, but he brushed it off, thinking I may have been dreaming or something. Then it happened again. He immediately shot up and looked out the window, and I did the same. We couldn't see a thing outside, and it was too dark. We made the decision to cut on the unit floodlights, which illuminate the entire area around the truck. I moved from the window to hit the button, and my partner stayed behind looking out the window. As soon as I turned them on, my partner gasped and jumped back from the window. I could see it as well. The light from the back of that unit illuminated an approximately 7-foot tall creature. It looked like it was turned around, but I could not make out a face. Most of it was hairless, but I did see some matted patches of hair here and there on its body. It had extremely long, skinny arms that appeared to drag the ground behind it. Parts of the body that were hairless appeared to be gray and wrinkly. It wasn't moving, just standing there with its back towards us. We decided to radio dispatch and told them to get a police unit to our location as there was a large animal outside of our unit. About 5 minutes later, we saw the lights from the police unit come from down the road. The creature looked in the direction of the lights, turned its body, and very calmly walked into the woods. The officer walked up to our unit and opened the door. We explained to him what was going on. He said that he didn't see anything as he was pulling up, and whatever it was gone now. It's been a few months since seeing this creature, and I've never seen or heard anything like it, and I have not seen it since. Granted, we don't park in that area anymore. Needless to say, we have stayed in the front of the truck now when posting, ready to floor it and drive away if anything like this happens again.
Here in Canada, I have in-laws way up north in a place called the Northwest Territories. They're native and have a lot of weird tales from their community. They have families spread all over the north, a lot of them whom are in Alberta as well, and will play into this story. So, it was a typical winter night, maybe 10-ish years ago at my in-laws' grandparents' house. Not that late or anything, but very dark due to that time of year, and it was way too cold to be outside. At least negative 45 Celsius, or negative 49 degrees. Everyone was just hanging out and watching TV. Kids were playing, and a typical average kind of night, you know? Suddenly, there is knocking at the door. Hard, persistent knocking. This was immediately strange, as they live away, outside of any town, with kilometers between neighbors, and unannounced guests are almost unheard of. Their grandparents are visibly concerned and tell them not to answer the door. The knocking became harder, and the guests began to speak, loudly stating that they were Auntie so-and-so, and that they had been invited over. The kids wanted to answer the door to see their auntie. Apparently, it sounded exactly like her, so their grandpa had to block the kids from going near the door and tell them to get away from the door and the windows as well. The knocking became into pounding, and the guest started yelling and screaming angrily to be let in. Eventually, it stopped and the guest was gone. The next morning, there were no tracks outside in the snow, and no signs of a vehicle had been in the area. This auntie lived in Alberta and had made no plans to visit. Anyway, that's about it. Not much for excitement, but that kind of shit is weirdly common out here in some places. Believe it or not, Wendigo is a major piece of folklore in that family as well, and they refuse to talk about it out of fear of drawing one in. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. Many times when you would ask natives about skinwalkers, they would get upset and would mostly refuse to even mention the word. My aunt went to a basketball game with the team my uncle was training. She stepped in since he was out sick. The game was on a reservation, and they were on a dirt road heading home around 8 at night, and she said an old woman started floating next to the van, and everyone started to scream. She told everyone in the car to pray, and she said that's when the old woman floated off into the dark. Nobody stopped praying until they got to the meeting lot where she dropped off the kids. Another story was from my friend Raiden. He told me that they were at his grandma's house watching TV at night when he heard knocking on the door. He went to go answer it and his grandparents yelled at him not to, saying that nobody comes out this late except for skinwalkers. He said after that, they heard knocking on the walls and windows, and the windows had boards that you could shut from the inside, so he never saw anything. He said the next day, he heard the walker get on top of their trailer outside and started thumping on it. Next day they came out, the roof was dented to hell. My friend Anthony told me a story of how him and his brothers were outside with their uncle, and they saw a skinwalker with blood-red eyes and pale white skin, but the face looked like a pig's. They said they sat there frozen, and they said that their uncle also froze in his spot after making direct eye contact with the walker, and the walker started walking towards them, and they said that they grabbed their uncle and dragged him inside and locked everything and called the cops. Some pretty terrifying shit. I wouldn't go searching for any of these things. It was around 11 p.m. at night. We wanted to visit a graveyard, so we ended up going to Double Butte Cemetery near South Mountain in Phoenix. As we were pulling in, a coyote dashed across the car and ran toward the mountains. It looked weird, like one of those overbred, incest German shepherds that are all short and hunched over. But I didn't think too much of it. We parked and walked away from the car and explored the graveyard. There were no sign of people or coyotes, but whenever we walked near a bush or a tree, we heard rustling. But we figured it was just some sort of rodent or bat. When we were done, we walked toward the car to leave, but we saw a cool little gated sanctuary garden type thing. So we went in there and sat for a little. All of a sudden, we heard what sounded like a weird mix of a laugh, scream, and a howl. I was confused to what this humanist scream was at first, so my mind immediately translated it to multiple coyotes, a pack. We were about to leave, and then we saw 4 sets of glowing eyes, crouching and coming toward us. Fast. I still figured an angry coyote pack, so we ran to the car. After being safe in the car, we got a little more ballsy and tried to find them. They were nowhere to be seen. I saw 3, maybe 4 shadows of human figures on the other side of the graveyard from the car. I thought to myself, wow, there are people here this late? I wonder why we didn't see or hear them. It's a pretty small, flat and treeless graveyard. Basically, just dirt and desert. So I'm pretty positive we would have known if there were others. Their shadows disappeared for a while, but I'm still looking toward that direction. That's when I saw the weirdest figure, hunched over, walking in the most awkward way. The way its body moved was swift and unnatural. It was the same direction where I saw the people. We drove over to that direction and found nothing and left. We get home and we noticed the car is scratched up everywhere, like a coyote was going crazy on top of the car. The scratches were long and dragged, in different directions, and a few dirt paw prints all over the car. We had a car wash the next day, and the car was completely untouched before, and I'm pretty sure of that. We also left a McFlurry in the trunk of the car, which was untouched and not moved. If coyotes got on the car, it definitely would have been destroyed, considered how dramatic the scratches were. So yeah, I'm wondering if what we saw were skinwalkers. The graveyard is also near a reservation, and it seemed like a lot of Arizona pioneers and natives were buried there.